respectful, but not too much to seem aloof. But today, there was something more in his demeanor. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but I could feel the shift as soon as the meeting ended. "Can you stay back for a moment, please?" Andrew asked as the rest of the team filtered out of the room, chatting among themselves about their next tasks. His voice was steady but softer than usual, and it caught me off guard. I had worked with him for a long time, but he never really asked me to stay after. He always respected my time, just as I respected his. I nodded, my curiosity piqued. "Sure. What's up?" He leaned back in his chair as I remained standing at the edge of the conference table, waiting for the others to leave. There was a quiet intensity in the room now, and I couldn't quite place it. My heart beat a little faster. I knew this wasn't just about work. It wasn't about the meeting we had just wrapped up. It was something more. After a few moments, he motioned for me to sit down, and I did, though I felt like I was sitting in front of something I wasn't fully prepared for. I could tell he had something on his mind, something important. "Listen," Andrew began, his eyes meeting mine with an unusual focus. "I've been thinking about some of the changes we discussed in today's meeting. There's a lot of potential for the direction we're taking, but I need someone I can trust to help me manage it." I nodded, knowing that my role in the company had been growing over the past few years. I had always been the reliable one, the steady hand when things needed to get done. But this felt different. There was a vulnerability in his voice that I hadn't heard before. "You've always done great work, and I appreciate your commitment," Andrew continued, his gaze never wavering. "But I need someone to take on a bigger responsibility in the coming months. Someone who's willing to step up and really take charge of some of these initiatives." I could sense where this was going, but I wasn't sure how to react. I wasn't sure if he was offering me a promotion, or if he was simply looking for some reassurance that things would run smoothly. Either way, there was something about the way he was speaking that made my heart beat just a little faster. "Of course, Andrew," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, though I could feel my palms starting to sweat. "I'm happy to take on more. Just let me know what you need." He looked at me for a moment, his expression unreadable, and for a brief second, the atmosphere in the room felt thick with something unspoken. Then, without breaking eye contact, he leaned forward slightly, his voice softer this time. "You're more than capable, but I also need to know that I can trust you with something. Personal," he said, the words hanging in the air between us. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. Personal? What did he mean by that? I had always thought of Andrew as a professional, and while we had spoken occasionally outside of work, it was always in passing, never anything too deep. But now, his words had taken on a different meaning. "Of course," I said, my voice uncertain. "What's going on?" There was a pause before he spoke again, as if he were weighing his words carefully. When he did finally speak, his voice was low, almost hesitant, but there was a depth to it that I hadn't expected. "I've been feeling a little overwhelmed with everything," he admitted, his shoulders tensing as he leaned back in his chair. "The company is growing, and I'm trying to keep up. But it's been harder lately to balance everything, especially when it comes to personal matters." I watched him carefully, trying to make sense of what he was saying. I knew Andrew had been dealing with a lot of pressure lately. Running a growing company, managing people, making decisions that impacted the whole team. But I never imagined he would open up like this. "I just need someone to talk to," he continued, his gaze softening as he looked at me. "Someone I trust to give me advice, to help me make sense of things." I didn't know how to respond. This was new, and I could sense the shift in the air. This wasn't just a work conversation anymore. It was something more personal, something deeper. I could feel the tension building between us, the unspoken connection that had been there in the background for so long, but was now undeniable. I shifted in my seat, trying to steady my breath. "You can always talk to me, Andrew," I said, my voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I'm happy to help however I can." He gave me a small smile, his eyes holding mine in a way that made me feel seen, vulnerable. "I know. I appreciate that. I don't take it lightly." There was another long pause, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on us. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but it was clear that it was shifting from professional to personal in a way I hadn't anticipated. And though I was unsure, I also couldn't deny the way his presence was affecting me, the way his words resonated deep within me. Finally, Andrew stood up, breaking the silence. "Thanks for listening," he said, his voice a little more normal now, though there was still something heavier in it. "I didn't mean to make things awkward, but I needed to share that with someone. I trust you." I nodded, standing up as well, though I wasn't entirely sure how to process everything. The conversation had left me with more questions than answers, but I also felt a sense of connection between us, a bond that I hadn't expected. Something had changed in that room. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew that whatever happened next, it would not be the same. "You can always count on me, Andrew," I said, offering him a reassuring smile, even though my own mind was racing with the implications of what had just been said. He smiled back, though it was a little strained, as if he were still working through something. "I'll keep that in mind." And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. It wasn't just the work-related conversation that lingered in my mind. It was the unexpected emotional connection, the way Andrew had shared a side of himself that I hadn't seen before. And though I wasn't sure where things would go from here, I knew one thing: everything had changed. As I stood there in the quiet office, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next, and what this shift in our relationship would mean for both of us. The days after that meeting felt like they were stretching out longer than usual. I couldn't seem to shake off what had happened with Andrew. The vulnerability he'd shown, the things he'd shared with me, had taken me by surprise. It wasn't just about work anymore. There had been an emotional shift between us, a subtle connection that hadn't been there before. I was still processing the conversation, wondering where it would go and how it would affect my role at the company or my relationship with him moving forward. I found myself more distracted than usual at work, my mind constantly drifting back to that moment. Every time I saw Andrew, there was an odd tension between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different. His gaze seemed to linger on me a little longer than necessary, and when our conversations turned to work, I could sense the undertones of something deeper. Then, one Thursday afternoon, as I was finishing up some paperwork, I got another message from him. It was short and to the point. He wanted to meet again after hours. This time, there was no question about it. He was clearly seeking something more than just professional advice. My heart skipped a beat when I read it. I had told myself that I wasn't going to read too much into things, that I wouldn't let the emotions from our last conversation cloud my judgment. But there was something about his request that made me feel uneasy, but also curious. I had finished up all my tasks for the day, and the office was practically empty when I arrived at the conference room. I sat there, waiting for him, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't going to be a typical meeting. It felt like we were both crossing a line, whether intentionally or not, into a territory I hadn't anticipated. A few minutes later, Andrew walked in, looking the same as usual, though there was a quiet weight to his movements. He closed the door behind him and walked toward the table, his usual confident stride replaced with something a little slower, more deliberate. There was something in the air between us, something almost tangible, and it was making my heart race. This wasn't about work anymore. We were crossing into new territory, and I wasn't sure what it would mean for either of us. "Thanks for staying," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I know this isn't exactly typical, but there's something I need to talk to you about." I nodded, feeling the familiar unease creep into my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but I could sense that whatever was coming, it was important. "Of course, Andrew. What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, his gaze steady as it met mine. "I've been thinking about the conversation we had the other day," he started, his voice low, "and I realized that I haven't been fair to you. I haven't been completely honest about what I'm going through, and it's affecting more than just my work. It's affecting my ability to lead the team." The vulnerability in his words caught me off guard. I had always known Andrew to be composed, professional, never one to wear his emotions on his sleeve. But now he was opening up in a way that made my heart ache. He was trusting me with something personal, something deeper than I had ever expected to see from him. "I think you've been carrying a lot on your shoulders," I said gently, my voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. "You don't have to do it alone. We're all in this together." He looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for something in my face. His eyes softened, and for the first time in our conversation, there was a sense of relief in them. "I know," he said quietly, "but I've been too focused on managing the team, on keeping everything together, that I've neglected the people who matter most, myself, my family." And he paused for a moment, his gaze flickering away from mine, before he continued, and I realized now that I've been avoiding the things that matter to me. I could feel the weight of his words, the depth of his struggle. It wasn't just about work for him. It was about something deeper, something more personal, and I could see that he was trying to reconcile the man he thought he had to be with the person he was becoming. "You're allowed to put yourself first sometimes, Andrew," I said, my voice softer now, filled with a quiet empathy. "It's okay to admit that you don't have everything figured out, that you don't have to do it all on your own. We all need support." He nodded, his lips pressed together in thought. "I've been so focused on meeting expectations, on keeping up appearances, that I forgot what really matters. I've been trying to keep everyone happy, but in the process, I lost sight of what makes me happy. I guess that's why I asked to talk to you." I could feel the weight of his confession settling between us. It was raw and vulnerable, and it made me realize just how much he had been carrying, how much he had been trying to juggle without showing any cracks. He wasn't just a boss trying to manage his team. He was a person, a man who had been struggling with the same pressures and uncertainties that everyone else did. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," I said gently, leaning forward slightly in my chair. "It's okay to take a step back and just breathe. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You just have to be honest with yourself about what you need." Andrew's eyes met mine again, this time with a sense of quiet gratitude. There was a shift in the way he looked at me, something softer, more vulnerable. "I appreciate you listening," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've been a bit distant lately, and I want you to know that it's not because of you. It's because of everything I've been trying to carry." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the weight of his words. He wasn't just asking for my help. He was opening up in a way that made me realize that he trusted me. And that trust felt like a heavy responsibility, but also a privilege. "I'm glad you came to talk to me," I said, my voice steady but filled with warmth. "We all need someone to lean on, and you don't have to do this alone." For a moment, we both sat there in silence, the weight of the conversation still hanging in the air. But this silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, like we had both reached an understanding that we hadn't shared before. Finally, Andrew stood up, breaking the stillness in the room. "Thanks for listening," he said, his voice a little firmer now, as if he had found some peace in the conversation. I didn't realize how much I needed to say that until I said it. I smiled, standing up as well. "Anytime, Andrew. I'm always here if you need someone to talk to." As he walked out of the room, I stood there for a moment, taking in the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just a work conversation. It was something deeper, something that had opened up a new chapter for both of us. We had shared something real, something that had changed our dynamic, and though I wasn't sure what the future held, I knew one thing. Things had shifted between us, and whatever happened next, we would both be different because of it. As I closed the door behind me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew that whatever it was, I was ready to face it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this journey. Ask ChatGPT. The days following our conversation were filled with a quiet energy. There was a shift between Andrew and me that I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was there, a subtle difference in the way we interacted. I noticed it mostly in the little things. The way our conversations seemed to have more depth, the way his eyes lingered on mine just a little longer, and the way he would ask for my opinion on things he hadn't considered before. It felt like we had crossed an unspoken line, one that blurred the boundaries between work and something more personal. I kept telling myself it was just the natural result of our conversation, the vulnerability we had shared. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was an undeniable connection that had formed between us, one that couldn't be ignored, even if we both tried to pretend it wasn't there. One afternoon, about a week after our talk, I found myself sitting at my desk, the usual hum of the office filling the background. I had finished my tasks early and was simply staring out the window, letting my mind wander. The soft sound of footsteps approached, and I glanced up, knowing without looking that it was Andrew. I didn't know why, but I could always tell when he was near. "Can I have a word?" His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made me pause. I turned in my chair to face him. "Of course, Andrew. What's up?" He stood there for a moment, his posture straight but relaxed. There was an unusual seriousness in his eyes. "Would you mind coming with me for a walk?" he asked, a slight uncertainty in his voice that made my heart skip a beat. "I need to clear my head, and I think you might be the best person to talk to." I hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Sure, let's go." As we walked outside, the cool breeze brushed against my face, and I could feel the tension in the air between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, quite the opposite, actually. There was something almost comforting in the silence that hung between us as we strolled through the nearby park, the crunch of leaves beneath our feet the only sound that broke the stillness. We hadn't walked far when Andrew spoke again, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about everything, about what we talked about the other day." He began, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his gaze focused on the ground ahead of him. "And I can't help but feel like I've been stuck in a pattern, one that's been holding me back, both at work and in my personal life. I keep trying to do everything on my own, but I don't know if that's the right way anymore." I could sense the weight of his words, and though he wasn't saying it outright, I knew he was referring to the emotions he had opened up about during our last conversation. He had spent so much time trying to hold everything together, trying to be the perfect boss, the perfect leader, and perhaps somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that it was okay to lean on others. "You don't have to do it all by yourself, Andrew," I said softly, my voice matching the pace of our walk. "We all need help, whether we want to admit it or not. And asking for it doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He turned his head to look at me, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that made my heart ache. "I've never been good at asking for help," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been the one people rely on. But when you're the one holding everything together, who do you turn to when it feels like you're falling apart?" There it was again, the depth of his struggle. I had seen glimpses of it before, but now it was clearer than ever. He wasn't just asking for help in a professional sense. He was asking for it in a personal sense too. And as I walked beside him, I realized that this wasn't just about him opening up to me. It was about both of us finding our way through the uncertainty we had been hiding from. "I think that's something you'll have to figure out on your own," I said, my voice steady, though I felt a deep sense of empathy for him. "But it's okay to take it one step at a time. It's okay to feel like you don't have it all figured out. You don't have to have all the answers right now." He nodded, his lips pressed together in thought. For a moment, we both walked in silence, the weight of our conversation lingering between us. But this silence was different. It wasn't awkward. It felt like we were both processing everything we had just shared. Finally, Andrew broke the silence, his voice quieter now, as if he were letting the words settle before saying them aloud. "I've been thinking about this for a while now," he began, his gaze flickering toward me before he looked away again. "About everything we've talked about. And I've realized something. I've been so focused on trying to be everything to everyone else that I've forgotten what I need, what I want. And I don't know if I'm ready to face it all at once, but I know I need to start somewhere." I stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him fully. "It's okay to take your time, Andrew. You don't have to rush this. It's a journey, and we all have our own pace." His eyes met mine then, and for the first time, I saw something different in them. It wasn't just the weight of responsibility anymore. It was a glimmer of understanding, a realization that he was finally allowing himself to be vulnerable, to acknowledge his own needs. "You're right," he said softly. "I've spent so much time trying to keep everything together that I forgot it was okay to ask for help, to lean on others. And I think I've been afraid to admit that I don't have all the answers. But I'm starting to understand that it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to just be." The words felt like a turning point, not just for him, but for both of us. There was something profound in what he was saying, an acceptance of the unknown, a willingness to step away from the pressure of always having to have everything under control. And as I stood there, facing him, I realized that this wasn't just a breakthrough for him. It was a breakthrough for me, too, because we had both been carrying burdens that weren't ours to carry alone. We stood there for a moment, just taking in the quiet of the park, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I could feel the change in the air, the subtle connection that had formed between us. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about something deeper, something that was unfolding between us, and I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew that whatever came next, it would be different. "I'm glad we talked," I said softly, my voice steady now, no longer filled with uncertainty. "I think you're starting to see things more clearly, and that's the first step." Andrew smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and for the first time, I saw a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I needed this. I needed to hear it." We walked back toward the office, a new understanding between us. I didn't know what would happen next, what the future held for Andrew or for us, but I knew one thing for sure. We had both taken a step towards something more meaningful, something that would stay with us for a long time. As I headed back inside, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Things had changed, and though the path ahead was still uncertain, I knew we had both grown in ways that would shape the future in ways we couldn't yet understand. Ask ChatGPT. The days that followed felt lighter somehow. The conversation with Andrew had shifted something between us, something unspoken but undeniably real. As the days went by, our interactions at work changed, though it wasn't dramatic. There was a new understanding between us, one that felt deeper and more honest. I could sense that Andrew had become more at ease with himself, and in turn, that ease began to affect the dynamic between us. We talked more openly, shared thoughts that went beyond work, and slowly I could tell that the walls he had built around himself were starting to come down. It wasn't an overnight change, and it certainly wasn't easy. But I could see the effort he was putting into confronting his fears, acknowledging his vulnerabilities, and letting go of the expectations he had been carrying for so long. And as for me, I felt a shift too. I had spent so much of my life focusing on being strong for everyone else, making sure I was the dependable one, the reliable one. But now I was learning to let go of some of that, to acknowledge my own need for connection, for understanding. I was learning that it was okay to open up, to be vulnerable, to allow someone else to see me for who I really was. Then one afternoon, about a week after our walk in the park, I got an unexpected message from Andrew. It was brief, just asking if I had some time after work. There was no mention of what it was about, but I could tell from the tone of his message that it was important. My heart skipped a beat as I wondered what this would mean. Was this another conversation, one where we would open up even more, or would it be something else entirely? After finishing my work for the day, I made my way to the conference room. As I walked through the office, I noticed how empty it was. Most of the staff had already left for the day, and the office felt quieter than usual. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside seemed to heighten the stillness, making it feel as though time had slowed down. I wasn't sure what to expect when I entered the conference room, but I knew this wasn't going to be a typical meeting. When I walked in, Andrew was standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned to face me as I entered, and I could immediately tell that something was different. His posture was more relaxed, but his eyes had a depth to them that I hadn't seen before. He wasn't the same man who had walked into my office those weeks ago, unsure of himself and struggling to keep everything together. There was a quiet strength in him now, a sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from him. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice warm but steady. "I know you're probably wondering what this is about, but I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of reflecting, and I realized something important." I stood there, my mind racing, wondering where this was going. "What's on your mind, Andrew?" He walked toward me, his movements slow but purposeful. "I've been thinking about everything we've talked about the pressure I've been putting on myself, about the need to have everything figured out. And I've come to realize that I've been holding myself back, not just in my work, but in my personal life as well. And I don't want to keep doing that." His words made my heart beat a little faster. There was something in the way he spoke now that felt more genuine, more open. It wasn't just about him finding clarity. It was about him sharing that clarity with me, allowing me to see a part of him that had been hidden before. And in that moment, I realized that whatever had been happening between us was not just about work. It was about our growth, both individually and together. "I've been afraid to take risks," he continued, his voice quieter now. "Afraid of failing, afraid of making mistakes. But I've learned that failing isn't the worst thing. The worst thing is staying stuck, not trying, not being true to myself." I could see the vulnerability in his eyes now, and it made my heart ache for him. He wasn't just talking about work or his professional life. He was talking about his life as a whole, about the fear that had held him back for so long. And in some strange way, I realized that we were both facing that same fear, that same uncertainty about taking the next step, whatever it might be. "I'm proud of you, Andrew," I said softly, my voice steady but filled with warmth. "It's not easy to face those fears, to admit that we've been holding ourselves back. But you're doing it. You're taking the first step, and that's the hardest part." He looked at me, his expression softening, and for a moment there was a quiet understanding between us. It was as if, in that instant, we both recognized something that had been building up between us, the connection that had grown through our conversations, through our willingness to be vulnerable and honest with each other. "I've been holding on to something for a long time," Andrew said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I think it's time I let it go." There was a weight in his words, and I could sense that this was more than just a work conversation. This was something personal, something that had been buried deep inside him for years, and he was finally ready to face it. I wasn't sure what it was, but I could feel the significance of it, and I knew that whatever came next, it would be a turning point for both of us. "I don't know what's next," he continued, his voice steady now. "But I'm ready to stop hiding, to stop pretending that I have it all figured out. I'm ready to take the next step, even if it's scary." I smiled, a genuine smile that came from somewhere deep inside. That's all any of us can do. Take it one step at a time. Andrew nodded, and there was a sense of peace in the air between us. It wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what was to come. We had both taken a step toward something new, something that would shape our futures, whether we were ready for it or not. "I'm glad I talked to you," Andrew said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I think I needed this more than I realized." "I'm glad you came to me," I said softly. "Sometimes we just need to be heard. And I'm always here." As he stood to leave, there was a quiet sense of resolution in the air. The conversation had been a turning point for both of us, and though we didn't know what would happen next, we both knew that we had made a change. Whatever came next, we would face it together, one step at a time. "I'll see you tomorrow," Andrew said, his voice steady but filled with a new sense of purpose. "Take care, Andrew," I replied, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. As he left the room, I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the conversation settle over me. Things were changing, not just between us, but within ourselves. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that whatever came next, it would be different. And that was enough.